Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. No woman walks away from her baby's crib without shoes, without her phone, and without a goodbye. Mamta didn't vanish. Someone erased her. August 2nd, 2024, Manassas Park, Virginia. It was a Friday. Quiet morning. Local humidity still clung to the air like wet gauze. Inside a two-story beige home on Christopher Lane, nothing looked unusual. The car was parked in the driveway, no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no screaming. Yet 28-year-old Mamta Kaflebat, pediatric nurse, mother to a 1-year-old girl, hadn't shown up for her hospital shift in 2 days. And she hadn't called in, she hadn't texted, she hadn't even picked up her last paycheck. That wasn't just odd, it was impossible. At UVA Prince William Medical Center, nurses described her as on time down to the minute, calm under pressure, and most notably, always putting her daughter first. When Mamta didn't show up for her July 31st shift, the team assumed something small. Maybe she overslept or had an emergency. But by the time August 2nd rolled around, with no word, no digital trail, and still no answer from her phone, a colleague placed a non-emergency request. "Can you please check on her? Something's off." It wasn't a 911 call, it was a wellness check, but it changed everything. Manassas Park police arrived just after 10 a.m. Naresh Bhatt, her husband, answered the door. Calm, cooperative, maybe a little too neutral. He told officers that Mamta had left home 3 days earlier. According to him, she needed a break. She packed a small bag and said she was going to see family in Texas. No, wait, New York. He changed that detail later. He said she left early, before sunrise. Took an Uber, maybe. She just wanted space, he repeated. But there was no rideshare history, no recent text messages. Her car, keys, and ID were still at the house. Most of her clothing remained untouched, and the baby monitor in her daughter's nursery still blinked softly on the nightstand. One of the officers later noted in the report, the scene presented as static, no signs of movement. If she left, the house didn't reflect it. There were no signs of forced exit, no signs of planning, just stillness. A missing person file was opened the same day. Mamta had last been seen by colleagues at the end of her July 27th shift. She had clocked out at 7:03 p.m., picked up diapers from a CVS nearby, and returned home by 8 o'clock. She texted a friend a brief message, just 3 words. Home, all fine. It was the last confirmed communication from her. When detectives pulled data from her phone carrier, her device had gone offline just after midnight, early on July 31st. No pings. No outgoing messages. Nothing unusual, except for the complete blackout. And if she had willingly left, she hadn't touched her bank account since. Her family in Nepal hadn't heard from her either. Mamta called her mother every 3 days like clockwork. She hadn't called in over a week. Investigators interviewed Naresh again. This time he said she'd been acting quiet lately, a little depressed. He suggested maybe she had left voluntarily, but when pressed for details, how she traveled, who picked her up, what day she left, his timeline changed each time. When questioned about why he hadn't reported her missing, he replied, "I thought she'd come back. I didn't want to overreact." That didn't sit right with lead detective Mark Hill. A woman doesn't go off-grid without taking money, ID, or her child, he later told internal investigators, and the husband seemed prepared to explain it away before we even asked. But there was no physical evidence yet, no signs of violence, no complaint on file, no digital footprint pointing to foul play. Still, they knew what they were dealing with. Not a runaway, not a miscommunication, but something more controlled, more deliberate. By August 5th, Mamta's disappearance made local news. A missing persons poster was circulated. Naresh agreed to speak briefly to a local station. He stood on his front lawn, arms folded, eyes still. "We just want her home," he said flatly. But the public wasn't convinced. Neither were police. They quietly began the first layer of forensic examination. Background checks, neighbor canvassing, initial sweep for digital inconsistencies. And behind closed doors, they filed the first internal note. Treat as suspicious disappearance. Husband's statement inconsistent. Surveillance and digital subpoena next step. The pressure hadn't yet reached the surface, but it would. There's a common rule in missing persons investigations. You start with the last person to see the victim. You don't begin by assuming guilt. You begin by checking consistency. Manassas Park detectives logged their initial notes by August 6, 2024. At that point, there was no body, no crime scene, no known travel record. But what they did have was a story, one that kept shifting. Detectives re-interviewed Naresh Bhatt at his residence, asking for a complete timeline of Mamta's final 72 hours at home. He stated that Mamta had packed a few things, mentioned visiting her cousin in Texas, and left quietly early July 31st around 5 o'clock a.m. while he was half asleep. When pressed, he couldn't produce her cousin's name, phone number, or address. When asked again 2 days later, he changed the state to New York. Investigators cross-checked all major transportation logs within a 100-mile radius for that date and time. No bus ticket, no Amtrak boarding, no domestic flight under her name. Her state ID and passport were both still at the house. No bank activity, no Uber records, a digital ghost. Then came the first procedural anomaly. Mamta's phone data showed its last confirmed signal at 12:18 a.m., July 31st. From a cell tower less than 800 feet from the couple's home. After that, silence. No outgoing texts, no app activity, no tracking from Google services. This wasn't a case of phone abandonment. It was manual deactivation or destruction. The forensic data team flagged this timeline immediately. A functioning smartphone, suddenly dark, within hours of a person disappearing without a reset or factory wipe. That required intent. Detective Hill made a private note in the case file. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem. By August 7th, the case was officially classified as a critical missing adult. A tiered response was authorized. That meant tech forensics, deeper subpoena access, and physical surveillance expansion. Mamta's social accounts were inactive. No login from any IP. Her email had no messages sent since July 30th other than a CVS receipt at 8:13 p.m. for baby wipes and infant formula. This was not the footprint of a woman planning to leave. Digital investigators then mapped household network traffic logs. Her phone had connected to the home's Wi-Fi at 11:59 p.m. on July 30th. There was no log-off, no handover to another network. This was not a departure. This was a disconnection. By contrast, Naresh's devices were active throughout the night of July 30th and early morning of July 31st. His laptop sent several outbound queries between 1:13 a.m. and 2:45 a.m., including searches like travel options from VA to NY, how long before missing person considered criminal, and how to track phone that's been turned off. The timing raised an internal alert. CCTV canvassing of neighboring homes offered limited coverage. One security camera captured the front of the Bhatt residence. Footage between 4:30 and 6 o'clock a.m. on July 31st showed no signs of exit or activity. No vehicles left the driveway. No visible lights from the interior. Nothing indicated a departure of any kind. There was no suitcase, no shadow, no movement. One forensic tech flagged a pattern worth noting. Naresh had reset the home's Wi-Fi router on August 1st at 2:33 a.m. That factory reset erased logs for device connections before that timestamp, but partial data was recoverable through the service provider. It showed that Mamta's phone disconnected suddenly, not faded over distance, but dropped off the network at 12:18 a.m. That was the same moment her device had stopped pinging cell towers. Another red flag. Detectives were beginning to layer inconsistencies. No financial activity, no verified travel. A phone cut from all data sources. And a husband who not only delayed reporting her disappearance but offered multiple departure stories with no verifiable details. They pulled footage from the hospital's staff parking lot. Mamta's car hadn't moved since July 27th. Dashcam data and building entry logs confirmed she hadn't returned to work, as Naresh had once suggested. All paths were closing. To the public, the case still looked like a missing person, frustrating but not unheard of. To investigators, it had entered a new category, deliberate concealment. The case hadn't cracked, but it was under pressure. There's a difference between a clean house and a controlled scene. Investigators walked into the Bhatt residence on August 22, 2024, with a signed search warrant and a checklist. What they found inside didn't scream violence, but it didn't speak to normalcy either. The first floor appeared undisturbed. No forced entry, no overturned furniture, no visible blood, but it was the absence of irregularities that raised concern. Kitchen counters had been wiped down with commercial-grade cleaners. Trash bins were empty. The air inside the home smelled faintly of bleach, concentrated and recent, not the faint leftover kind, the kind used after something specific had to be removed. Upstairs, the couple's shared bedroom showed signs of abrupt change. The mattress was new, tag still intact. Investigators confirmed via transaction records that the previous mattress had been discarded and a replacement purchased from a local warehouse store on August 2nd, 2 days after Mamta was reported missing. Forensics ran luminol on the subfloor below the removed mattress. Faint traces of blood patterning appeared across a concentrated section of the slats. The staining was irregular. Small, projected droplets, not smeared. A presumptive test confirmed the presence of human blood. Later, DNA processing matched the sample to Mamta Kaflibat. The team documented the layout, a nightstand on each side, a baby monitor plugged in and facing the opposite wall. No sign of struggle, no bedding, no visible personal effects out of place. But the room looked like it had been reset. In the ensuite bathroom, forensic technicians collected swabs from the sink and under the rim of the toilet. Bleach levels in those areas were consistent with recent heavy application. Inside the bathroom's small trash can, they recovered paper towels, one with trace amounts of reddish-brown residue. The sample tested positive for human blood. Again, DNA confirmed Mamta as the source. It was the first physical confirmation that her body had been injured inside the home. The trash pickup logs were then reviewed. Naresh had not placed any bins on the curb between July 30th and August 4th. When asked why, he later told investigators he forgot. But camera footage from a neighboring property showed him taking 2 large black bags to the rear of his car trunk on the night of August 1st. The bags were never seen again. What was missing from the house told its own story. Investigators noticed an uninstalled home security camera on a shelf identical to the model used in other rooms, but the one facing the hallway outside the bedroom had been removed. When asked about it, Naresh claimed the unit had connection issues. Yet, technicians determined the router it connected to had functioned normally during the time frame Mamta disappeared. The living room's smart speaker showed a gap in its activity log from 11:50 p.m. on July 30th to 5:12 a.m. on July 31st. No music, no voice commands, no motion-triggered recordings. An unusual blackout for a home with a 1-year-old and 2 working adults. Details were starting to line up, but too neatly. No overkill, no chaos, everything stripped of randomness. As one investigator noted in the after-action memo, the house didn't read like a family home where someone went missing. It read like a stage built to deny it ever happened. Additional testing on the hallway baseboards found diluted blood trace. A sample revealed mixed profiles, both Mamta and Naresh present. That finding wouldn't mean much on its own. Married couples cohabitate, but paired with evidence of cleanup and a missing person, it carried weight. In total, the forensic sweep yielded over 20 samples tied directly to Mamta, all confined to a 10 by 12-foot area upstairs. The forensics unit classified the scene as primary blood evidence with post-event manipulation. In short, the home had been cleaned. The timeline matched the delay in reporting Mamta missing, and the changes, mattress swap, router reset, camera removal, had no reasonable domestic explanation. This wasn't speculation. It was methodical. It was procedural, and it shifted the investigation's tone entirely. Internally, the designation moved from critical missing to suspected homicide with concealed remains. They still had no body. But they had something else: undeniable blood, chemical interference, and behavioral indicators that aligned with premeditation. And as of August 22, 2024, Manassas Park PD no longer treated this as a search. They treated it as a crime scene. By late August 2024, the investigation had transitioned from searching for a missing woman to identifying a concealed crime. The home was no longer just suspicious, it was forensically compromised. Still, without a body or a confession, detectives needed to tighten the timeline, locate motive, and prove intent. In cases like this, where physical evidence is limited, behavior fills the gaps. And digital behavior speaks louder than people realize. With court authorization, investigators gained full access to Naresh Bhatt's digital accounts, including email, browser history, Google activity logs, and his Amazon transaction history. They weren't searching for confirmation of wrongdoing, they were searching for chronology. because guilt often isn't just in what was done, but when it was planned. Starting with Google activity tied to Naresh's primary account, forensic analysts reviewed a 96-hour window from July 29th to August 2nd. Within that window, keyword queries included: how to clean blood off floorboards, how long does it take police to file missing person report, can police find someone if phone is off, how long to wait to remarry if spouse disappears. These weren't idle searches. They were time-stamped. Most occurred between 1 o'clock a.m. and 4 o'clock a.m. On July 31st, the same hours Mamta's phone went offline and her digital presence ceased. Investigators cross-referenced these searches with local device usage. Naresh's home IP address showed active connections during the exact window. His laptop had remained online continuously. The data wasn't speculative, it was conclusive. The searches were made from inside the residence on his personal machine during the time frame his wife disappeared. Further review of Naresh's Amazon account revealed a pattern. On July 30th at 8:37 p.m., he purchased a roll of heavy-duty trash bags, nitrile gloves, a folding utility knife, and a 2-gallon container of industrial-strength bleach. All items were fulfilled via Amazon Prime. The order was placed hours before Mamta's phone dropped from the network. The items were delivered on July 31st. By themselves, these purchases could be explained away. But when placed alongside the digital search history and physical evidence from the home, bleach residue, trash bag activity, removal of mattress, the sequence supported a coordinated event. Investigators didn't stop at purchase logs. They requested data from Google's location services, specifically timeline tracking from Naresh's Android device. On August 1st, the data showed a 2-hour trip to a remote wooded area west of Manassas with no prior pattern of travel to that location. The device disconnected from cell towers briefly at 3:04 a.m., then reconnected an hour later on a different route. He returned home by 5:20 a.m. No financial transaction was linked to the trip, no gas receipts, no reason given. The area wasn't searched immediately. Manpower was limited, and there was no confirmed body. But the trip was marked internally as critical anomaly. It was the first geolocation ping tied to an unexplained excursion after Mamta's disappearance. Internally, investigators reviewed the combined data, search terms, purchase timestamps, travel logs, against the statement Naresh had initially provided, that Mamta left on her own early July 31st, possibly to visit family. None of his account held under digital scrutiny. The pattern was clear. His story existed in isolation. The data, in contrast, followed a timeline of planning, cleanup, and concealment. Detective Hill noted in a team briefing, he was searching disposal methods while claiming he was asleep. He bought bleach before she ever went missing. We don't need a confession. We already have the planning phase documented. Digital forensics doesn't show motive, it shows process. And in this case, the process was sequential, deliberate, and carefully concealed, until it wasn't. The forensic report compiled after the digital analysis ran 87 pages. The conclusion was clear. Mamta's disappearance coincided with digital behaviors consistent with body disposal preparation and preemptive misinformation. No body had surfaced, but by this point the investigation no longer relied on recovery. The digital trail was strong enough to support prosecutorial action. And beneath the surface, one question remained. What exactly had been done in the early hours of July 31st? By early September 2024, law enforcement in Manassas Park, Virginia had something most missing persons cases never reach: an internal consensus. Mamta Kafli Bhatt, 28, was no longer considered missing. She was presumed dead. The case, still officially filed under endangered adult, now operated procedurally as a homicide. What made this case stand out wasn't the nature of the crime. It was the methodical way it unfolded, without a body, without a crime scene in the traditional sense. The timeline didn't begin with a call to 911 or a panicked family report. It began with absence, quiet, unexplained, and was built entirely on forensic gaps filled by data. Investigators had already mapped a working theory by September 3rd. It was based on 4 data anchors: Mamta's last known digital footprint, the forensic evidence found inside the home, Naresh's behavior post-disappearance, and his digital search and purchase history. Together, these factors didn't prove guilt in isolation. But they did eliminate coincidence. Still, prosecutors faced a hurdle. Without a body, a charge of homicide would be scrutinized. Convictions in bodiless cases are rare. To move forward, the evidence had to show three things clearly: that Mamta was deceased, that her death resulted from a criminal act, and that circumstantial and forensic evidence reasonably pointed to one person. On September 6, the Commonwealth Attorney's Office requested a case presentation. Detectives summarized the key findings: confirmed human blood with Mamta's DNA recovered from bedroom subfloor and bathroom surfaces. Timeline correlation between bleach purchases, Google searches, and Mamta's disappearance. Cell site analysis showing Naresh's phone at an isolated rural location at 3:00 a.m. August 1st. Removal and replacement of key household items, mattress, router, camera, days after Mamta was last seen. No evidence that Mamta accessed financial, medical, or legal services since July 30th. They didn't need to prove exactly how she died. They needed to prove she could not be alive. The prosecutor reviewed the data for 3 days. On September 9th, the green light was given. Detectives were instructed to prepare for arrest, but there would be no press release, no knock and announce. Naresh Bhatt was considered low risk for flight, but high risk for concealment of further evidence. A quiet, controlled apprehension was necessary. The arrest occurred on September 13, 2024, just before 7:00 a.m. Officers waited until Naresh left his house to drop his daughter at daycare. He was intercepted in the parking lot, handcuffed without resistance, and informed he was being taken into custody for questioning regarding his wife's disappearance. Inside the precinct, Naresh declined to speak without legal counsel. He invoked his rights and was processed without incident. What followed was a procedural milestone. The charge was not second-degree murder or manslaughter. Naresh Bhatt was formally indicted for first-degree murder and concealment of a dead body, despite no remains having been found. This wasn't unprecedented, but it was rare. Virginia law allows for a murder indictment without a body if the Commonwealth can prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that a death occurred and was caused unlawfully. In this case, the circumstantial structure was strong. The absence of Mamta's living trace after July 30th, paired with forensic evidence and documented concealment behavior, formed the basis of that proof. The indictment document ran 16 pages. It detailed the bleach, the mattress, the inconsistent statements, the blood, the shopping records. It outlined how every alibi eroded under data review. But perhaps most importantly, it identified a window of opportunity. Between midnight and 5:00 a.m., on July 31st, Naresh's phone was active. Mamta's wasn't, and the house showed signs of deliberate cleaning shortly after. Prosecutors described it as a timeline of silence that spoke for itself. At a closed-door pre-trial hearing held September 20th, investigators testified to their findings. The judge ruled that sufficient probable cause existed to proceed. Naresh Bhatt was remanded without bond. A trial date was set for June 2025. No plea was entered at that time. No confession was given. But the criminal process had begun. At a press briefing that followed, Chief Investigator Mark Hill addressed public concern over pursuing a homicide charge without a body. He didn't offer opinion, he offered protocol. We follow evidence. If the evidence shows concealment, intent, and irreversible absence, we move forward. We don't need a grave to find the truth. And in many ways, that became the central theme of the prosecution's case. There was no grave, but there was no life, no contact, no calls, no movement. Just data, blood, and behavioral gaps all lining up in the wrong direction. As the trial loomed, one thing became clear: if justice was to be served in this case, it would have to come from evidence that couldn't be buried. In the spring of 2025, the case of Commonwealth of Virginia versus Naresh Bhatt moved out of the investigation room and into the courtroom. It was scheduled for trial in Prince William County Circuit Court, with jury selection set for June 2nd. The indictment was already unusual, a first-degree murder charge without a recovered body. But prosecutors weren't approaching it as a gamble. They were treating it as a calculated prosecution built on forensic precision, digital sequencing, and behavior analysis. From the outside, the trial carried a sense of weight. There were no violent crime scenes shown in public, no surveillance footage of a last known sighting, no tearful witness recounting a moment of horror. Instead, it was a case constructed entirely from what wasn't there: Mamta's voice, her bank activity, her phone signals, her presence in the world after July 30th, 2024. The legal challenge was to prove that her absence wasn't an accident. It was the result of intent. The prosecution's pretrial strategy was built around sequencing. They knew the jury would struggle with the absence of a body. So instead of emphasizing that void, they focused on what could be demonstrated with certainty. Assistant Commonwealth's attorney Megan Spencer would lead the case. Her team prioritized expert witness prep, digital forensics layout, and a neutral tone. Emotion wasn't the strategy. Logic was. The first major pretrial motion came in mid-April. Prosecutors requested that digital search records and Amazon purchase history be admitted as foundational evidence, not as circumstantial inference, but as behavioral indicators. The defense objected, calling the material prejudicial and speculative, but the judge allowed it. In her ruling, she wrote, "The search history and purchasing records are temporally aligned with the alleged victim's disappearance. The evidence does not assert motive, it establishes conduct." That motion cleared the way for prosecutors to build a timeline as testimony, not just of what Naresh Bhatt allegedly did, but when and how it corresponded to Mamta's disappearance. In May, the court reviewed a second motion, the admissibility of forensic blood analysis. The defense again objected, this time arguing that small quantities of DNA in a shared household did not establish violent action. Prosecutors countered with pattern evidence, spattered geometry from the subfloor beneath the removed mattress. The blood wasn't passive transfer, it was projected. The court sided with the Commonwealth. The forensic analysts were approved to testify on spatial patterns, chemical presence of cleaning agents, and the fact that Mamta's blood was identified in areas not visible to the eye, indicating both injury and post-event cleaning. By late May, over 40 pieces of evidence had been approved for use at trial. They included swab samples from the bedroom and bathroom tested for human blood, luminol and blue star reaction photos from beneath floorboards, Amazon records dated July 30th showing the purchase of bleach, gloves, and a utility knife, Google account logs showing search queries during hours Mamta's phone went offline, cell site location data showing Naresh's travel to a wooded area on August 1st. What remained unavailable was Mamta herself, no body, no bones, no burial site. But the legal system didn't require one, not in Virginia. As long as the Commonwealth could establish death beyond a reasonable doubt and prove that the defendant caused it unlawfully, the case could proceed. The defense strategy centered on doubt. They planned to argue that Mamta may have left voluntarily, that no witness had seen harm inflicted, and that the absence of her body allowed for alternative explanations. But their biggest challenge wasn't the lack of direct proof. It was the presence of too much indirect data, each point verifiable, each one reinforcing the others. In her final pretrial filing, prosecutor Spencer summarized it in one line. When a person disappears and every piece of data surrounding that moment points inward, toward the defendant, toward concealment, toward planning, the absence becomes the evidence. Inside the courthouse, the seats reserved for family remained mostly empty. Mamta's relatives had traveled from Nepal months earlier but were not scheduled to testify. Their presence was symbolic, quiet, dignified, but powerful. Detective Hill, who had worked the case from its first report, remained involved through trial prep. When asked during an internal interview what stood out most about the case, he said, "You learn to tell the difference between a disappearance and a deletion. This wasn't chaos, it was method, and method leaves traces." The case was moving toward trial. No headlines, no spectacle, just a quiet prosecution in a courtroom where the victim wouldn't speak and the defendant refused to plead. What remained now was whether the jury would hear the absence as clearly as the evidence had recorded it. There are moments in every investigation where the evidence stops whispering and starts speaking clearly. In this case, it happened on day 4 of the trial, when a forensic digital analyst took the stand and pulled up the security footage from Naresh Bhatt's own home. Before July 30th, 2024, Mamta's phone was regularly connected to the home Wi-Fi. Activity logs showed late-night browsing, social media use, video calls to her family in Nepal. After 10:24 p.m. on that day, her digital presence disappeared entirely. But Naresh's devices told a different story, and one of them, his indoor security system, had been recording without him realizing it. When investigators recovered the footage in August, most of it had been deleted or overwritten. But Bhatt had neglected one key fact. His system included a cloud-based backup setting that had been activated during a recent update. It captured 36 hours of footage. 2 files remained from July 30th. They weren't gruesome. They didn't depict violence, but they did show patterns. At 10:03 p.m., Mamta entered the bedroom holding a tablet. She was wearing indoor clothes. Her posture was relaxed. She set the tablet on the nightstand. At 10:07 p.m., Naresh followed her in. He was holding a phone, not speaking. At 10:09, he closed the bedroom door. That was the last recorded image of Mamta Pat alive. The next file was dated July 31st at 3:12 a.m. The same bedroom, same camera angle. The mattress was gone. The sheets were gone. A shop vacuum sat by the wall. Naresh moved into the frame carrying a roll of plastic sheeting and a dark duffel bag. He looked directly at the camera for half a second, then turned it away. That footage was played in court without sound. The courtroom was silent. There was no need for dramatization. The forensic analyst explained how the footage had been recovered from the cloud via subpoena to the security system provider. Metadata confirmed the date and timestamps. No signs of tampering. The original data log showed deletion occurred on August 2nd, 2 days after Mamta's phone went offline. The defense tried to suppress the impact. They suggested the footage only showed a late-night cleanup, that the mattress could have been discarded for any number of reasons. But the analyst's report clarified the timing. Mamta's digital presence ended before this scene, and Naresh's cleanup began immediately after. Prosecutors used this as an anchor point, not a smoking gun, but a shift in tone. This wasn't about supposition anymore. It was about verifying movement. Next came the testimony from the local waste management service. On July 31st, Naresh had driven to the county landfill. Records showed he paid for a single-load drop-off. When officers visited the site in mid-August, they requested location access logs. Surveillance at the landfill showed Naresh arriving with black bags and bundled material, consistent with the type of cleanup seen on the recovered footage. The bags were long gone, but what couldn't be removed were the purchase records. 2 days before, he had bought those bags in bulk, and bleach, and gloves, all with the same card. The timestamps lined up with the footage. The purchases occurred on July 30th at 6:41 p.m. That left a narrow window between procurement and disappearance. Then came the data from the vehicle's onboard system. Naresh's car was equipped with GPS-integrated service tracking. On August 1st, the logs showed a drive to a wooded area just outside Fauquier County, Virginia. He remained there for 48 minutes. The vehicle was stationary during that time. Detectives visited the site, but weather and time had deteriorated any chance of recovering trace biological evidence. No shallow graves, no discarded items. But the car's presence, alone, late at night, in an area with no known personal or professional ties, raised more questions than the defense could answer. The prosecution's narrative became stronger not through emotion, but through calibration. They weren't speculating that Naresh committed violence in a burst of rage. They were showing a sequence of deliberate movements: the footage, the landfill visit, the secluded drive, the deletion logs, each supported the next. One juror later described the process as watching someone tie knots behind their own back. The defense made a final push by bringing in a digital behaviorist. Their expert argued that deletion patterns on home systems were often automated or random, but under cross-examination, the expert admitted that for this particular brand, deletion required a manual override. Someone had to open the app, select the files, and choose delete permanently. That didn't help their argument. When court recessed that evening, the family seats remained empty. There was no one to speak for Mamta in the gallery. But what was heard loudest was what couldn't be heard from her anymore. As investigators often remind each other in closed-door briefings, devices don't forget, even when people try to make them. By early 2023, the Fairfax County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office faced an increasingly rare but legally viable path: proceed with a no-body homicide case. The timeline, the digital forensics, and the suspect's behavior painted a picture that, while incomplete without a recovered body, was disturbingly clear. Bethany Decker was presumed dead, and Naresh Patel, her former partner, was charged with her murder. Despite the absence of human remains, prosecutors presented a web of circumstantial and forensic evidence too consistent to ignore. Naresh's cell tower data and security camera footage contradicted his timeline. Deleted texts between Bethany and her family showed escalating concern, and the last person proven to be with her, the last voicemail received, came from Naresh's number. The investigators had also discovered surveillance footage showing Naresh visiting a remote area in rural Virginia 2 days after Bethany's disappearance. Though no body was ever found there, soil samples collected from the trunk of his car matched the region's unique soil composition, providing a physical connection with no credible explanation from the defendant. A forensic analyst testified that attempts had been made to factory reset Bethany's laptop and phone shortly after she vanished. The only person with access, Naresh. But perhaps the most damning detail wasn't forensic. It was behavioral. After Bethany vanished, Naresh had assumed control of her apartment, cut off contact with her family, and told her employer that she had left the state. No missing person report came from him, no cooperation in searches, only silence, lies, and distance. At the pretrial hearing in February 2023, the court determined the evidence met Virginia's threshold for probable cause, even in the absence of a body. The charge of second-degree murder would proceed to trial. This decision marked a rare but critical moment, reaffirming that a lack of remains does not mean a lack of accountability. The prosecution emphasized not what they didn't have, a body, but what they did: motive, opportunity, and a clear pattern of coercive control. They painted a disturbing timeline of escalating psychological abuse, financial isolation, and violent threats. Bethany's last months were not those of a woman preparing to flee, but of someone trying to survive long enough to leave. Naresh's defense team clung to the absence of physical remains as proof of reasonable doubt. They argued she may have run off, that she was alive, just hiding, but the timeline, the messages, the silence, they all screamed otherwise. As of July 2025, no trial verdict has been reached, but the charge stands. Naresh Patel is in custody, awaiting trial. The legal machinery turns slowly, but it turns. I've walked you through 8 chapters of disappearance, evidence, and slow-burn justice. And what's most haunting isn't just that Bethany Decker vanished, but that she vanished so quietly. No dramatic exit, no visible struggle, just erased. That silence, that's what abusers count on. This case reminds us, justice doesn't always come with a gravestone. Sometimes it comes through persistence, through patterns, through data, and through the refusal of a family and a system to give up. Bethany's remains have never been found, but her name, her voice in text messages, her final digital footprints, they told investigators what they needed to hear. In the absence of a grave, her story remains evidence. If you know someone trapped in silence, listen closely. Absence speaks, and sometimes it cries out louder than words. I've told you Bethany's story not just as a case file, but as a quiet alarm. Because sometimes the most dangerous moments happen behind closed doors in silence. If you're in a situation where something feels off, trust that instinct. No one just disappears. This case taught me that justice isn't always about the verdict. It's about people refusing to be silent, refusing to forget. And maybe that's the lesson. Never stop asking questions when someone goes quiet. If this video moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? Or tell me what you would have done in Bethany's shoes. If you didn't like the story, I still want to hear why. Let's talk. And if you believe stories like this matter, hit subscribe. I've got more stories that speak the truth.